Okay. Dear colleagues, it's my pleasure to open the first session of this and to chair the first session of this conference. I've got the honor to have the eminent guests on my left. I propose that we start immediately without further ado, as we have 1 hour and a half for 4 interventions and hopefully a bit of discussion. So I'll have one crucial demand that you already are aware of keeping in 15, maximum 20 minutes, just to enable like 10-15 minutes at least of the discussion at the end of the first panel. I'll start with presenting briefly my major interventions. Professor Miloš Šesnik, that you've already heard a while ago. I would just like to remind you to receive a PhD in general history, working on patriotism and identities in Real Prussia in the 18th century, in 1989. Then a postdoctoral qualification, habilitationsschrift if you like, in general history at Palacki University, Olomouc, devoted to Polish national uprisings, transformations of elites and collective identity, 1764 to 1994 to 1864. He's been advisor in the foreign ministry of the Czech Republic, research associate at Charles University, the University of Technology in Liberec, and the famous Center of History and Culture of East Central Europe, the GLCO in Leipzig. Finally, Professor of European Regional History at Cambridge University of Technology, and, as we all know, since 2014, Director of the German Historical Institute in Warsaw. Dear Miloš, the floor is yours. Finally.
So, good afternoon again. I try my best to hold my computer here. It's doing. So, dear colleagues, in my statement, I would like to make some consideration of the problematic of retrotopic practices in current policy of history and in current historical thought. What does it mean? Let's start from an observation with an observation to the role of history and historiography in late modernity. I suppose you will agree with me that the position of academic historical science is not the same as it has been some 50 years ago, and definitely not the same as it was the case some 100 years ago or 150 years ago. We are definitely out of historicist period, so there is less and less acknowledged, recognized general social relevance of academic historical research. But on the other side, we can observe that history is present more and more everywhere. You can go to library and show and look how many historical books are there. You can look the programs of broadcasting of television with many of historical of historical programs topics. You can look that there is a lot of history in modern, postmodern computer games. You can observe that there is a lot of history in some subcultural scenes like Gothic and so on and so on. You can also observe that there is a lot of history in entertainment. Some authors are speaking of histotainment of our days. Even travel agencies used history to sell what they offers. There is a lot of speech of authenticity, of visiting authentic places, sometimes quite odd combinations. Nowadays I have seen that there is a offer of travel agencies to visit authentic places which had to do with the story of what's the name of the hero and of the role in Harry Potter. So you can visit the authentic places of where an virtual story took place. This is only one example the changes of our understanding of authenticity. One of many possible examples. So you can observe that our using of history changes too. Maybe, and that's the point for me to thematize the postmodern functionality of history, but because seemingly we are maybe coming back to normality, coming back to aesthetic functions of history, not only academic, not only historiography and history as an object of what in German is called Erkenntnis, object of epistemologic strategies, but also a part of aesthetics. And so I could now also quote the Polish culture minister for culture, that said some 5 years ago, we too want to have a beautiful history. It's very, very important wording, because that was made in context of what is called in Polish historical diplomacy and politics of history. So I believe that the beauty of history has impact of our positions today. And you all have also experienced, since at least in the news and in television, with people destroying historical monuments in America, in Great Britain, and different places several years ago. People that wanted to do something with the past, with the tradition, with the heritage of history. What does it mean, retrotopy? Retrotopic practices. Retrotopic practices are practices that are trying to change history or to do something with history. The practices that are based on imagination that history can be influenced by us with our memorial practices. So the idea that memorial practices and politics of history can change the way history appears, and in the same time to change history or to re-establish a moral balance that was destroyed through historical processes. With the notion, with the category of retrotopy or retrotopia, of course I'm recalling Zygmunt Bauman. That was also the title of the last book. I think that was the last one of the books by Zygmunt Bauman, 2017. And Zygmunt Bauman, the starting point for his consideration was an observation of sociologists and literature scientists. So if we look at how we in our culture and in our times are considering the future, what are we expecting from future, we can observe a general tendency, a general negative tendency. So we are expecting, as majority of people living in Western cultures now, today and here, expecting less and less positive things and more negative things. There are two developments where this tendency is obvious. The first one are the surveys in Western Europe and especially in America. If you ask people in sociologist surveys, do you believe that your children and grandchildren will live better, will have more happy life than you had? So still in the 1980s, the large majority answered yes. Our children, our grandchildren, and our grandchildren will live better and better than we have lived, or that we are living. Now this view changed dramatically. The majority of people don't believe that. The majority of people says now I'm afraid our children and grandchildren will deal large problems and will definitely not have better lives and better circumstances than that we have or we had. So you can observe a turn to negative expectation towards history. And if you look at the same times of the development of the genre of science fiction in film and in literature, you can see the same tendency. Science fiction till the 1980s were marked predominantly by positive expectation. The future was something good. The people will develop new technologies, to new means of transport, organize their life better and better, and the world better and better. So people had positive, authors had predominantly, not always, but predominantly positive expectations or positive imaginations on the future, and that changed dramatically since the 1990s too. It's the same development. Looking at science fiction films and reading science fiction literature today, what could you see? Negative expectations, pessimism, darkness, or a lot of darkness, destroyed world, destroyed social relations, the law of the strong people, and so on. And that this development is copied for another development in our political discourses. Please look at political discussions in Western countries since the 1980s. So you can observe one tendency is the tendency to argue about things that are not so important. So, should there be a speed limit on the motorways in Germany? Should there be a tax 22% or 20% or 21%? What you don't see is the crash of large ideologies, the crash of imagination. How should our society look like in 30, 50 years? Some authors argue, of course, there are still ideologies that believe that we are able to form future world, but they are in the minority, and sometimes they are very dangerous because they are radical ideologies. But because of these radical ideologies, there are not a clash of these great projects and imaginations, and the consequence Zygmunt Bauman made is that we are probably at the end of the historical period of utopias. Utopias is very typical that utopias appeared at the beginnings of early modern times, at the very beginnings of modernity, and somewhere at the end of modernity, somewhere they disappear. And the answer is that what the thing or the tendency Bauman has described and observed is a kind of answer of this situation. If we are not able to form our future, so instead of the future, we will form our past, and that's the background for speaking of retrotopy. We would need a lot of time to describe that are different examples in the politics of history and in different countries, not Poland, Hungary, but also democratic countries, or liberal democratic, not also democratic, or liberal democratic countries tend to develop their own retrotopical historical policies, maybe, for example, through the agenda of Geschichtsbewältigung in German case, or Geschichtsverständigung. But one example to the very end, because I think I'm speaking for 15 minutes maybe? 13, so 2 minutes. So I would recall one very specific phenomena in the last maybe also 30 years in international, transcultural, but predominantly Western historical thought, or the thought on policy of history, and that's the medium of historical apologies, the praxis of historical apologies. We can observe that in the 1990s, at the beginning with the 1990s, these practices were very frequently, almost every meeting of politicians in Europe or outside of Europe. So journeys of European politicians outside of Europe were somewhere connected with dealing with history, and sometimes connected with apologies for history. And so what is very important in this practice is the new tendency since the 1990s to apologize. So the idea that through apology I can repair what was done or what took place in history, at least at a moral level. So to re-establish a moral balance, but the tendency to go farther and farther, deeper and deeper in the history. So we are today not only discussing possibly apologize for what was done, what took place in the 20th century, some 50 or 70 or 80 years ago, but we are speaking of 19th century. Sometimes think of this colonialism discourse. Sometimes we are also discussing apologies, or expecting apologies for what took place in the 16th century. The Pope made an apology for crusades in the 12th and 13th century. What is very important this moment is that we have no discussion where are the limits for that, because that's obvious that we have the tendency to develop endless numbers or endless possibility to define perpetrators group and victim groups. Every of us is potentially member of endless many victim and perpetrators group through the history. And what is important, our position depends not only from the history itself, but from our identities nowadays. From the question if and how far we are identifying nowadays with a group in 13th or 16th or 17th century, or with another group. And now we can see that this retrotopic history has still to do with identity building. And that in this point, retrotopic practices still remain to be influenced by historicists think of the way of thinking about the role of the past. Past is something that is past is a very decisive circumstances for our roles in the society and for our identities, for our possibilities, for what some authors used to call accumulation of moral capital that can be used in political context. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for respecting the time, Joe. It was 17 minutes precisely. And I would like to ask the words they had been out. You've got the presentation.
Yes.
By the style, I just briefly present. Yourself, you've has a PhD, graduated in a PhD at Samara State University. Was an assistant professor at Russian Academy of Sciences, Institute for Anthropology and Ethnology, later Russian State University for Human Sciences, the Moscow School of Social and Economic Science, and she's been also for a long time coordinator for history and scientific exchange for the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in Russia, and since 2022 she's research associate at the Humboldt University of Berlin. And we will hear about memorial laws leading to memorial wars. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me. I tried. It's difficult. I try to respect the time. So the title that you see, Memory, from Memory Laws to Memory Wars, actually it's a little bit, I borrowed a part of it from the title of the book of Nikolai Kopasov, Memory Laws, Memory Wars, The Politic of the Past in the Europe and Russia. And his definition of the memory laws, so you see here, was contained in France in 2000 to refer to legislation and penalties, Holocaust negotiation. So it's very famous. I think that probably everybody knew it, but I put it anyway. And the notion can be used both in a broad sense, encompassing all laws that regulate collective representation of the past, and in the narrower sense of prohibition of Holocaust denial and other similar legislation. So it's very complicated, actually, notion. The term, rather than a single type of legislation, the term in fact covers a complex of different related phenomena. In the broadest sense, it includes laws that define state symbols, create museums, or grant amnesties or benefits to participants in certain historical events. It's also there in this legislation. So it's the book of Nikolai Kopasov. So memory laws from 2000 already, and from 19th actually became a pan-European phenomenon. Okay, it must be how to turn it back. Okay, put the both of this. Actually, I want to show only one. But so in a post-war, post-2000 war, Second World War, in this contemporary war, we need this to say it already. In the post-war decades, historians developed an increased focus of the oppressed and eventually moved from what already Miloš also told, from supposedly objective social history to the interest in multiple subjectivities. This paved the way for a democratization in the form of memory boom that stripped historians of their monopoly on legitimate history writing. So the past has become a source of Inosus heritage, defined by its role in the present. So because of memory boom, and since 1930, European countries have laws criminalizing statements about the past on their books. So, however, initially conceived as a means of maintaining peace, these laws have instead become one of the preferred instruments of the memory wars within and between many European countries. And the war that we're seeing now, it's unfortunately also the part of this. So what Georgy Kasyanov in his new book called Memory Crash, that memory crash, politics of history in all and around Ukraine. So memory laws were an important instrument in the memory war between Russia and Ukraine, also in 2014. And now it's unfortunately a real war. So all fans of memory laws, sport, so how Nora calls it in France, so it's French sport, memory laws, need to be aware of its potential dangers. Could you help me to come back? I was too quick. Not a mouse. Okay, so thank you. So laws that regulate collective representations of the past are not new phenomena, but laws that criminalize certain statements about the past they are new. Even in USSR, with its formidable system of censorship, had no memory laws in the narrow sense. Yeah? The emergence of memory laws is, in the strict sense, shows that in the age of memory, the past became even more important for cultural identity and political legitimation than it was in the age of history-based political ideologies. The laws that criminalize certain statements about the past. Sorry, that's a put here, and it was a confusion. Also even it's doppelt, also two times put it in. I don't know how it happened actually, but I hope that you can read. So what's happened now in Russia, we can call crimes against history. That's a term, that very famous term of Anton de Bates, that he wrote a book, Crimes Against History, in 2018. The picture that you here seeing, that's dismantling of plaque of memory of the victims of the Great Terror and the Katyn massacre. It was in Tver, 2020. It's a photo from International Memorial. And I just want to skip very shortly, that's memory, so to call memory laws in Russia, that actually I put in under crimes against history. During President Putin's first term, 2004, the president and administration denied any need for a state ideology. Putin cast himself as a non-ideological figure, claiming to be working solely in the line with technocrats' objectives. The aggressive offensive of historical politics became visible to all after Medvedev presidency, so after 2012. The first known law is Article 354.1 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation, which criminalizes the rehabilitation of the Nazism, so to say. That's a long title. I come back to this article further. The law was introduced in the State Duma during Medvedev presidency in 2009, but the bill provoked widespread disapproval, including in the Cabinet of Ministers. It was not discussed for several years, and until it was just quickly passed in May 2014, against the backdrop of the Ukrainian crisis. No, and 2020 it became a part of the Russian Constitution of the Russian Federation. So this article 345.1, it's a dissemination of unknownly false information on the activities of the USSR during the Second World War. That is original title. The title of the law is misleading, for it actually penalizes a much broader range of expressions. Yeah, not only about Nazi crimes, but also about the role of the Soviet Union in the Second World War as such, and about Russian military history in general. So, and rather than protect the dignity of individual victims, what's actually memory laws must do, or victim from state crimes, they propose in rather that, and quote, to enforce an officially sanctioned way of relating to the past as a means of strengthening national identity. Quotation end. This clauses permit the state to prosecute those who share government disapproved, also read false, views of Soviet Union policies during the Second World War, or who express disrespectful opinion about Russian military history. So, and what it will be disrespectful decided the state, of course. Between 2015 and 2018, this enforcement of this article on the criminal code has resulted in 25 convictions, and only one acquittal, not including an unknown number of criminal cases that did not reach trial. Ironically, that is the man they are seeing here, that's ironically only acquittal under this article was a Holocaust denial case. That's a man denied the Holocaust, and he was acquitted. Roman Yushkov, a resident of Perm, wrote on social media that so-called Holocaust was a shameless swindle intended for non-Jews, Germans, Russian, and everyone else. this quotation end. He also questions the Holocaust deaths and saying that estimate of 6 million Jews was, quotation, great fraud. It was because of as a context, yes, because of proposed building of memorial, Jews Holocaust memorial, actually, how to say it in, Alexei, what is the name was this memorial was? It's Holocaust memorial, must be constructed in Perm, I think. But okay, as I forget the name of this museum that was proposed, and it was his reaction on this proposal. But anyway, here actually named the Holocaust and 6 million Jews great fraud, and at first he was enforced in this article, after that acquittal. And he was only one in 25 cases, yeah. Instead, the majority of the other proceeding under article, to the extent the publicity available concern those who spoke about the Soviet Union international crimes committed between 1939 and 1945, questioned the official narrative Soviet Union role in the Second World War, or invoked history in the critique of the current regime. All of these people was convicted. So this article is particularly striking in nowadays, what's happened now. So you all know that in 2014, at the annexion of Crimea, Second World War played a great role, and so on, is all symbolic. And what's striking is current only slight reference to the Great Patriotic War. Yeah, look at these pictures. It was 2014, yeah. This was 2014 as na Berlin, as on this quotation from the Second World War. But now, nothing like of that. We not see the banner on autos na Berlin or something. And this is a picture of the 9 Mai parade in St. Petersburg. That's a uniform of Russian police battalion. So I don't know, is it what's designers thought about it? Yeah, probably just special kind of yeah, blaming. Yeah, so it's some kind of silent protest probably from designers, because everybody can read. Yeah, how does it look like? And the other picture, yeah, from the parade in 90 Mai. So all this can repeat actually goes back to this inspiration left by Soviet soldiers on the walls of the Reichstag. There's nothing in this discourse of this war, 2022. So it's very interesting that actually it refers to the Second World War, but this memorial law that actually must help to create a good view about the Second World War. They're now working otherwise. Yeah? As radical as it is, the Russian case, that points to broader tendencies, I think, in the evolution of the legislation of memory, which is now being widely used in promoting nationalistic goals. And another, do I have a time? Yeah. So another laws, 5 new laws, that actually already mostly not about the Second World War, but about fake news. But nothing, now it's everything is fake, what actually against what the government's saying about this war. So you can see, I just put it here, that what I mean, and it's a lot of people was convicted already, yeah. And so when the first article, this 2,354, it was only 25 people in some years. Then here now it's more than 50 or more than 100, and it's now. And the first article was 5 years, and now it's 15 years and 20 years. Yeah, so it's much harder than our Russian institution. Actually, now it's criminal law. For the years after the Crimea annexation, mostly administrative law, so you pay money and you stay free, but now it's criminal law, so you go to prison. It's a great difference, of course. And just something nice in the end about that's using of the history and from the society actually as a protest. Yeah, this first one and on your right, yeah, that's for endless 20 years we have waited with hope for the belly. Yeah, so Belly Swan Lake was a symbol of the death of Soviet leaders. And I was a child. I've seen it every 2 years, yeah, because they died and very often. And it was only one what you could see in Russian television and Soviet television at this time. So that's the people playing with this. Yeah, that's the belly figures. It's 4 belly figures, like a silent protest, also using the history actually. And the other one from your left is this old ballerinas, but it's just instead of the letters, yeah, no war. It's нет войне. It's 5 войне and нет. It's 3 letters. So no war. It's just something that to remember that the society also using history in this way. But actually, that's the most important point that I want to put here in my presentation. That is, we need to be very, very accurate, very aware with memory laws that's widespread in Europe, because they're mostly used now for actually nationalistic ideas that to defend the victims of some state criminal. And then also bring specific historical consciousness together. So probably all these wars, actually memory wars, is actually reciprocal. It's an English word to this memory laws that was developed from the 2000 actually. Thank you for attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation and for respecting the time. And it's my big pleasure to give the word to the next participant, which is Professor Luba Jurgenson, memorial study specialist, literary historian, writer, translator, and essayist. She obtained her PhD, The Indicible of the Real, in the works of Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Varlam Shalamov in 2001 at Sorbonne University. There also her postdoctoral qualification as the Habilitationsschrift, A Trace and Testimony in the work of Varlam Shalamov in 2009. Since 2002 she works at Sorbonne as associate, and since 2016 as full professor. She is also the director of the Mixed Research Unit of BEM, Cultures and Societies of Central Eastern Europe and the Balkans. Jan Redel, no, she's not Jan Redel.
Sorry.
Not yet.
She's the vice president of the Association Mémorial France, and she's Knight of the French Legion of Honor. Luba, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mateusz, and thank to all the organizers for inviting me. So I will speak about some issues of memory studies, some present issues. On February 2024, researchers working on Russia lost their research fields, their Russian collaborators and partners, and their projects related to Russia. For those who, like me, work on the memory of violence, this shock was coupled with the feeling of powerlessness that was expressed through a question: is it still relevant to work on the memory of the past when such violence is taking place in the present? Not only did the work of memory to which I tried to contribute with my research, but also with the Memorial Association, not prevent the war, but the fact that I had analyzed the states of amazement experienced and described by the witnesses of extreme violence was of no help to me when I myself, without being a direct witness of the war, felt an amazement in front of the events that we were following live that prevented me from thinking. Like everyone else, I expressed it with the most banal words. I can't believe it. I want to wake up, and so on. In the same time, I answered several requests for explanations about Putin's instrumentalization of historical memory, about the reasons for the persecution and dissolution of memorial, about the links between the gradual invisibilization of the memory of the Gulag in Russia, the valorization of the Stalinist period, and the current war. This seemed to show that the research we had done on this question was rather useful. It is thus in a back and forth between the awareness of the necessity of research on the memory of the past and that of its failure that this communication is inscribed. Since the First World War and the emergence of the figure of the witness is central to the construction of memory, memorial mechanisms have been put in place from the beginning of conflicts. Thus, during the First World War, those who mastered writing were requested to produce testimonies. While it is, of course, impossible to predict the paths that will be taken in the construction of the memory of the present war, initiatives are also emerging almost everywhere, including in France. They are often based on the collection of oral interviews and the constitution of oral archives. Thus, I am personally aware of 3 projects that will be conducted within Eurorbem and others emerging at CERSEC, to mention only 2 Parisian research centers. I myself have a project to collect testimonies. That researchers will soon have a vast corpus of oral archives, including interviews with the Ukrainians, Russians, and Belarusians. Various questions will then arise: how to preserve them, these interviews, how to make them accessible, how to use them. Among these researchers, which often focus on the experience of exile, we can identify several tracks. The exile of women, for example, and children. The question of reception and hospitality. The comings and goings. Some leave, then come back. Some leave Ukrainian and come back to Ukrainian. The trauma, the identity, the impact of propaganda. How can we build a coherent knowledge on the war from there, and how will these interviews participate in the construction of memory, of the memory? The interviewees answer questions that are being asked today. How can tomorrow's researchers find answers to tomorrow's questions? Moreover, some research remains unresolved. For example, I would like to investigate the destruction of the landscape, my current research topic. But it is not easy to ask these kinds of questions to people whose lives or the lives of their relatives are in danger. The landscape appears as a question of post-memory, which can only be conducted after the fact, after the war. But we do not know today the extent of the destruction that has already occurred and will occur in the future, nor do we know what observational devices should be put in place to monitor this destruction. I am thus in this paradoxical situation where, on the one hand, the present offers an exceptional field of research, and on the other hand, this field can only be explored when it belongs to the past, and I do not know the duration on which to project myself. If I manage to carry out this research, which I hope I will, it will be a test of the methodologies developed to think about the past in areas that are suitable for post-memory. Another question that arises for researchers in memory studies, it's a very delicate question, is the link between memory and political commitment. Certainly, questions of memory have always been political. If scientific neutrality has often been an unattainable goal in this field, today it is even more difficult to preserve it, because this neutrality could and can today be undermined not only by the political positioning of researchers, but also by the evolution of the countries in which the research fields are located. Thus, in recent years, the reluctance of certain Central and Middle European countries to confront the memory of complicity in the Shoah has led researchers, and especially Western and French researchers, to focus more on this memory, on the memory of the Holocaust, than on the memory of Soviet violence, from which these same countries have derived a victimized identity, forgetting the complexity of the history of their bloody lands. In this context, the visibility of Soviet repressions and the demands for recognition of their memory in the same way as the memory of the Holocaust have shocked many researchers who have seen in it a minimization of the genocide, or even a usurpation of the place of the victims by community that have not done their work of remembrance of the dark spots in their history. These are highly sensitive subjects. I go quickly because, which the current war requires us to revisit. For example, the rise of nationalism in Central Europe has sometimes led to a negative perception of the Solidarność movement or Charter 77, the memorial laws condemning the crimes of communism in the same way as Nazi crimes, or the decommunization of the urban space in ex-communist countries. The appearance of monuments to Bandera in Ukraine, the heroization of the OUN in Ukraine and the cursed soldiers in Poland only reinforced the idea that decommunization goes hand in hand with the denial of minimization of the Shoah. Among the arguments that have been proposed to invalidate the paralleling of Nazi and Soviet crimes was the absurdity of considering that the forces that liberated Auschwitz, that is to say Soviet army, are identical to those that committed the genocide there. Now we see that the discourse of the liberation of Europe by the Soviet army is one of the key points in Putin's propaganda for the war. This invalidates this argument, which is moreover very problematic because it was already used by the pro-Stalinists after the Second World War. Among these very sensitive topics, there is the question of the Holodomor. This question has evolved over the last decade. The claims to qualify the Holodomor as genocide had met with some resistance in French academic circles for various reasons, notably because these claims were perceived as the expression of a war of memories, the memory of the Holodomor being in competition with the genocide of the Jews and intended to cover it up. But also because, as we know, Ukraine was not the only territory to be hit by the famine. This one was used as a weapon against all the populations which resisted to the collectivization, especially in the richest regions which knew the most terrible lives of their reserves. It was thus necessary to consider the whole of the Soviet famines in order to understand the specific logics on the Ukraine. This is the work that Nicolas Werth has done in France, showing that there was indeed a Ukrainian specificity. For example, only in Ukraine was the ban of leaving villages affected by famine really applied. In this sense, Nicolas Werth's book recent book brings a much more subtle vision than that of Anne Applebaum, who sees the famine especially under the national angle. On one side, the Russian occupiers, and on the other side, the autochthonous Ukrainians. Things are much more complicated, and the Ukrainian famine must be seen in the more general context of the relationship between the Soviet state and the peasants. Ahead of these two important books, that of Nicolas Werth and Anne Applebaum, the great historian Annette Becker, also a French historian, had included in the English edition of her book, Messengers of Disaster, published in 2022, the issue of genocide in Ukraine. The book is about genocides and about Lemkin in particular. The issue of genocide in Ukraine that she had previously left out of the French version published in 2018. Indeed, Lemkin, in the end of his life, considered the Holodomor as genocide. The question of genocide ultimately seems secondary for historians to the question of Peasantization. But for memory studies, as well as for researchers involved with Ukraine, it takes on a new meaning today. If yesterday the memory of the Holodomor could be felt as a memory against that of the Holocaust, today this memory authorizes a comparison between the two events. The extermination by hunger and that by bullets or gas, and becomes a complicit memory of that of Holocaust. The cinema has contributed to this inversion of meanings. The film of Agnieszka Holland, Mr. Jones, and of 2019, and that very recent of Guillaume Ribot, Bloody Harvest, showing that since the annexation of Crimea, the question of the Holodomor has resurfaced in a strong way. Putin's blackmail of famine and the wheat war, the present wheat war, have also contributed to reactualization of this question, showing to what extent the weapon of famine was part of the Russian arsenal and of the Russian political unconscious. As an example of the porosity between memorial studies and commitment to this issue, I can say that I myself signed a collective letter written by several researchers now and published in the journal Esprit in favor of the recognition of the Holodomor as genocide. I have some time? 2 minutes? Okay. Finally, I see another important path emerging from the current situation, namely a great integration of studies of Russian colonialism and the memory of Russian and Soviet violence into post-colonial studies. Indeed, post-colonial studies are resisting to build bridges to the question of political violence in the USSR and its memorial posterity, which is, however, inseparable from any reflection to one of the greatest modern empires. One of them is undoubtedly that the Soviet domination was taught of by the actors of memory in the regions concerned more in terms of occupations, notably in the case of the former Western republics and in Georgia, more than colonization. Another reason probably has to do with the memory inscribed in the post-colonial field itself. During the period of decolonization, the Soviet Union played the anti-colonial card, positioning itself as the defender of oppressed people, with the aim of taking part in the new division of the world and avoiding economic colonization by the West. This discourse, taken up by the actors of the anti-colonial struggle, has durably prevented the part of the Western liberal intelligentsia from recognizing the repressive aspects of the Soviet system, and its legacy still weighs on Euro or Western-centric post-colonial studies. It seems to me that today the situation is changing, and the crossroads between historiography, memory studies, and colonial studies will be more fruitful from now on. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Bayogeta, and which enables me also, we've got still perfect timing. Thank you so very much. And now we give the words to Professor Jan Redel, historian of Central and Eastern Europe and Polish-German relations, author of Politics of History in the Federal Republic of Germany, Legacy, Ideas, Practice in 2011, and Polish occupation of Northwestern Germany 1945-1948, an unknown chapter in Polish-German relations, published in 2000. Until 2010, he was a researcher and a professor at Jagiellonian University, and is currently a professor of the Pedagogical University of Krakow. Between 2001 and 2005, he headed the Office of Culture, Science and Information at the Polish Embassy in Berlin. Since 2008, he has been Poland's representative on the board of the Polish-German Foundation for Sciences and the coordinator of the Polish part of the European Network for Remembrance and Solidarity.
Thank you very much. I would say the title of my contribution should be perhaps Poland and Ukraine, some essayistic comments on the historical premises of their mutual relations. The history of Polish-Kievan, Polish-Ruthenian and Polish-Ukrainian relation is as old or as young, depending on one's point of view, as Polish statehood. The history of these relations is extremely volatile and intense. They contain beautiful and heroic chapters, as well as ones marked by sorrow and shame. They are fixed in the historical consciousness of Poles and arouse great emotions to this day, both positive and negative. The sui generis mood swings resemble a sine curve. The Polish song Hej Sokoły, Hey You Falcons, was composed by Maciej Kamieński at the beginning of the 19th century. The author of its lyrics is unknown, but he can be ascribed to the circle of what is referred to as Ukrainian school of Polish Romanticism. You can start for a few seconds.
Tutaj w polskim lasku dla was sokoły. Żal, żal za dziewczyną, za zieloną Ukrainą. Żal, żal, serce płacze, już cię nigdy nie zobaczę. Hej, 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 sokoły, omijajcie góry, lasy, doły. Dzwoń, 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 dzwoneczku, mój stepowy skowroneczku. Hej, 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 sokoły, omijajcie góry, lasy, doły. Dzwoń, 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 dzwoneczku, mój stepowy dzwoń, dzwoń, dzwoń. Ona je...
That's enough. The song Hej Sokoły has been widely known in Poland for 200 years and belongs to the staple favorites of popular music accompanying all kinds of Polish fiests. In the Ukraine, of which its lyric speaks, the song is rapidly, until 2019, gaining popularity. You can start this next part of the song.
Сів на коня козак молодий, плаче молода дівчина, їде козак з України. Гей, 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 соколи, оминайте горі лісодоли, дзвін, 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 дзвіночку, степовий жаль вороночку. Гей, 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 соколи, оминайте горі лісодоли, дзвін, 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 дзвіночку.
Thank you very much for helping me. Hej Sokoły is an example of the constant presence of a certain positive image of Ukraine and all things Ukrainian in the consciousness of Poles, which is now being applied in Ukraine itself. Note that there is no such song about Poles in traditional German culture, nor is there such a song about Germans in Polish culture. You can say also about the same about the Czech culture, I suppose, I'm afraid. Polish historical consciousness, however, also contains many strong, completely negative narratives about Ukrainians. Since the time of the Cossack uprising, there has existed in Poland the stereotype of Ukrainian rezun, from the Ukrainian word rizun, meaning butcher, a savage murderer. This stereotype was clearly reinforced in the first half of the 20th century, when in 1919, there was a hard, though not yet bestial, civil war for the control of Lviv and eastern Galicia. It ended with Polish victory and the shattering of the independence aspirations of Ukrainians living in eastern Galicia. Today's Western Ukraine. During the interwar period, the conflict in these areas smoldered continuously. Ukrainians formed increasingly radical nationalist organizations using terror against the Polish state. The Poles responded with very brutal repressions by the police and army, including acts as heinous as the demolition of Orthodox churches. The hatred was spiraling ever faster. It exploded during the Second World War. The climax came between February 1943 and December 1944. When units of the Ukrainian insurgent army carried out an insanely cruel ethnic cleansing in the territory of first Volhynia and then eastern Galicia and partly Polesia. Between 80 and 100,000 Poles, around 1,200 still surviving Jews, and approximately 900 Ukrainians who opposed the murders lost their lives at the time. As a result, Polish defensive operations and retaliation by the Home Army, no less than 3,000 Ukrainians were killed. Some believe much more. The ethnic cleansing proved effective as the prospect of living under Soviet rule among hostile Ukrainians prompted Poles to flee the area en masse. Thus, For example, the number of Poles in the Volhynian voivodeship dropped from 16.5% to 3 per mile. The systemic Polish vengeance affected Ukrainians living within Poland's borders after 1945. They were displaced from their native territories in the southeast of present-day Poland to Lower Silesia and East Prussia in 1947 as part of the communist Operation Vistula. In view of the recent traumatic experiences, this displacement was quite widely supported by Poles and became one of the relatively few factors legitimizing communist rule in the country. It took a relatively long time for views challenging the uniformly gloomy image of Ukraine and Ukrainians sorry, I forget to move my presentation. In the 70s, knowledge of the now famous Giedroyć-Mieroszewski doctrine formulated by emigres in Paris and London, stating that Poles could only permanently break free from Moscow hegemony if they did so jointly with Ukrainians, Lithuanians, and Belarusians, became widespread in Poland. The idea of a strategic agreement with the immediate neighbors living to the east of Poland became an important, if not most important, component of Polish geopolitical thought during the 80s. The events of 1989 to 1991 in Central and Eastern Europe seemed to be putting the Giedroyć-Mieroszewski doctrine into practice in the Deus ex machina fashion. After the collapse of the USSR, Poland was the first country in the world to recognize the independence of Ukraine. Relevant treaties on good neighborhood and friendship were soon concluded with genuinely high hopes in Poland. Close and trusting military contacts were also quickly established, which proved to be very durable. The film adaptation of Henryk Sienkiewicz's novel With Fire and Sword, which was widely known in Poland and important for Polish identity in the late 19th century and 20th century too, became a kind of cultural or historical political representation of these hopes and emerging cooperation. The novel is set in the years 1648-1651, during the Great Cossack Uprising led by Bohdan Khmelnytsky. It was an exceptionally cruel and devastating conflict that started the downfall of Poland and at the same time marked the beginning of Ukraine's dependence on Moscow. Sienkiewicz portrayed Khmelnytsky as a demonic traitor to the common mother, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and the Cossacks and Ruthenian Ukrainian people as wronged by Polish magnates, freedom-loving but dim, savage and cruel. Director Jerzy Hoffman, who had already successfully filmed two of Sienkiewicz's novels that together with Fire and Sword make up the Polish trilogy, faced a very difficult task in the 90s, as he wanted to tell the contents of this novel without galvanizing Polish-Ukrainian antagonism. He succeeded in this by showing Khmelnytsky as a statesman and the main Cossack protagonist, Bohun, as a personality de facto equal to the Polish main characters in the novel. Partly, he achieved this by casting in these roles very prominent Ukrainian and Russian actors, Bohdan Stupka and Alexander Domogarov. The film, which premiered in 1999, became a great success in both Poland and Ukraine and genuinely contributed to increased empathy and mutual relations. However, developments in Ukraine did not, however, developments in Ukraine did not confirm the optimistic prediction of the early 90s. The country was not making the necessary reforms. The oligarchs divided the economy and the political scene between themselves, and corruption seemed omnipresent. Poland, on the other hand, focused on its efforts to join NATO, and the European Union increasingly turned its back on Ukraine, neglecting contacts and building up its influence there. To make matters worse, some patriotically minded Ukrainian politicians, in an attempt to integrate society, reached back to the traditions of the Ukrainian nationalist movement and the Ukrainian insurgent army from the Second World War. They expected the anti-Russian stance of this organization and their fierce struggle against the Soviets, which lasted until the mid-50s. At the same time, they ignored the fact that as the wartime mass murders were very much present in Poland's living memory, these traditions were completely unacceptable there as a constitutive component of Ukrainian identity. Relations between two countries remained cool, and anti-Ukrainian Polish commentators became increasingly vocal. The efforts of the Polish-Ukrainian churches trying to initiate reconciliation using the we forgive and ask forgiveness formula, so helpful in the case of Polish-German reconciliation, did not help. The peak of the trend exposing the tragic aspect of Polish-Ukrainian relation in the first half of 20th century turned out to be the film Wołyń, which premiered in October 2016. It was made by Wojciech Smarzowski, one of the more efficient contemporary Polish directors, specializing, however, in the most drastic subject matter portrayed in a realistic manner. Someone said that Wojciech Smarzowski makes films using the axe. You see the axe in the hand of the director. Conceptual work on the film had been going on since 2011, and shooting began in early 2014, when the film received funding from the Polish Film Institute. Let me also point out that the director is a fierce opponent of the current Polish government and very anti-cleric. The film is certainly not a primitive propaganda attack on Ukraine. Nevertheless, nevertheless, the realistic scenes of the slaughter of Poles by Ukrainian insurgent army dominate the perception of the film. The work provoked an icy reaction in Ukraine. The Ukrainian actors who starred in it were condemned. Its premiere in Ukraine was cancelled. In contrast, the film was a huge box office success in Poland. In the same year when Wołyń premiered, the Polish Sejm established the the National Day of Remembrance for the victims of genocide committed by Ukrainian nationalists against the citizens of Second Polish Republic, as its full name reads. As it seems, another turn in Polish-Ukrainian relations took place in late 2018, early 2019. The celebrations of the centenary of Poland's regained independence began then, stretching from 2018 to 2021. That is covering basically the entire period of the formation of the states. In these wide-ranging and by Polish standards well-prepared celebrations, the centenary of the fight against the Ukrainians in Western Galicia played a minor role. Instead, the Polish-Ukrainian alliance concluded between the Marshal Józef Piłsudski and the President of the Ukrainian People's Republic, Szymon Petlura, the joint seizure of Kiev to rebuild the Ukrainian state, and the joint fight against Bolshevik invasion was highlighted. Sorry. More photographs. I have no time to explain the details. The pro-Ukrainian turn in Polish attitudes reached an absolute and, truth be told, for everyone, even experts, unexpected peak with Russian massive attack on Ukraine on 4th of February. Its manifestation was the widespread, essentially not inspired and initially not coordinated by the state action of help refugees crossing the Polish border in 10,000s from day one, as well as to send humanitarian, medical and other aid to Ukraine. Individual Poles bought and sent to Ukraine clothing, shoes, first aid kits, rucksacks, night vision equipment, helmets and bulletproof vests for Ukrainian soldiers. The news of large supplies of Polish weapons to Ukraine were... sorry, I forgot once again to show the according pictures. The news of large supplies of Polish weapons to Ukraine was received with full support, even enthusiasm. I don't know and do not want to know how many volunteers from Poland are fighting on the front line in Ukraine today. Opinion polls showed that in March of this year, 94% of Poles declared themselves ready to accept refugees from Ukraine. At the same time, 63% of respondents declared that they provided such assistance. A similar turnaround occurred in Ukraine. Opinion polls conducted there showed that 83% of the people, excluding refugees residing abroad, had a very good or good attitude towards Poland. And 33% believed that the best term to describe its relation to Poles was brother and sisters. And so on, I have to come to conclusion. If we think about the possible consequences of this explosion of mutual goodwill and generosity in Polish-Ukrainian relations, combined with fundamental improvement in Polish-Lithuanian relations, and the extensive and long-standing assistance that Poland has been providing to Belarusian opposition, we can speak of not only the implementation of the Giedroyć-Mieroszewski doctrine, but even the contours of the former Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth emerging from the Clausewitz fog of war. Even today, maps of this budding community of Poles, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Lithuanians, Latvians, and Estonians can be found in the internet. So, sorry, few more sentences. A fortnight ago, the respected political and military analyst and advisor to the president of Ukraine, Oleksiy Arestovich, said that a conditio sine qua non for a lasting end of the conflict with Russia was the formation of close alliance and coalition of Ukraine, Poland, Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Could it be that history has come full circle after 400 years? Let me read to the end. Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda attended this year's Independence Day celebrations in Poland on 11th of November. He said, the tradition of resistance to injustice and love of freedom handed down from generation to generation is close to every Pole. We Lithuanians value it too. It is a wealth inherited from common past of Lithuania and Poland. Since ancient times, our two countries have been united by the duty to defend the values of civilization. Nausėda stressed on the same day in message of the Ukrainian President, we could hear, dear Poland, Poland, you are our sister. You know, Polska and Ukraina are feminine. Poland, you are our sister. We have had some ups and downs in our relations, but we are a family. And today, when we face an old common enemy, we are together. So I ask again, has history come full circle after 400 years? To conclude, let me make a few more general and unfortunately rather obvious observations. History does not determine today's events or today's political decisions, as it is rather geography, as geopoliticians and geostrategists claim, that is such a determining factor. History does, however, provide us with models describing certain political situations, analogies worth pondering, and patterns of behavior or sets of values worth upholding and defending. Well, Historia Magistra Vitae, here is Marcus Tullius Cicero for you. our Central and Eastern European teacher of life, the magistra, has a great deal to say to Poles, and it works in different ways. Some may speak about the century-old strategic importance of the so-called Smolensk Gate, Piłsudski's policy toward Ukraine, or Giedroyć-Mieroszewski doctrine. Millions of Poles have no idea of these, but rush to the aid of the attacked Ukrainians because they have an atavistic awareness of what an invasion by barbarians from the east means, by the Mongols, be they Mongols, Muscovites, Bolsheviks, or the Rushists, as the Ukrainian used to say in these days. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We've got, fortunately, thanks to some discipline, runs still 15 minutes for discussion, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know how we proceed with the microphones, but I just maybe before giving the floor to the audience, I would like to submit to all four of you a few reflections after having heard all those inspiring presentations. A few words that from the beginning till the end of all of the four communications we've heard appeared to me pretty important, where on the one hand the necessity of reflection on memorial and historical issues and their uses in the contemporary world, and the failure at the same time of such a politics, leading to moments, as you almost all underlined in different contexts, of how history becomes not a domain of any kind of science, but politically controlled, determined, and used, instrumentalized realm. And between subjectivation on the one hand and instrumentalization on the other, when history becomes either politics or entertainment, as you've mentioned, and memory leads from individual experience to political instruments, I would like you to reflect or to suggest maybe 3 domains of reflection, and feel free to follow each and every the one you'd like to choose. Is it that in the face of war that lasted 8 years but exploded particularly this year, tendencies already present have just accelerated? Did we discover newly some elements, or we just fully realize in what direction are we going to? That would be the first direction. The other question would be, to what extent did we forget in our reflection in the previous decades the role of emotions, affects, and narratives used and being able to be used in the politicization of history, for instance? And maybe a third one would be how to deal with the memorial big data we are facing actually. Like last week we had a historical games workshop at the CEFRES when we've observed the use of Czech, among others, the use of Czech medieval past in the digital games. Just to mention, the digital games produced, for instance, in the Czech Republic are sold in 5 million copies worldwide. And those are the means with elements of history appeal and manipulate and use and form actually the minds of the younger generations for the next years to come. And do we have, as scholars, colleagues, memorial studies specialists, any ways and means to answer to those new ways of perceiving history actually? 3 very general directions. Feel free to answer, and then we'll open the floor to the public if you don't mind.
Maybe I have just a little reflection about the games, because I participated recently and I co-organized a summer school in Milano about digital memories with 2 colleagues who are specialists of digital memory and especially of electronic games, and they, according to them, these games can be a very interesting tool in teaching memory and history. So maybe we have these two aspects of games, but what is interesting this in the sum of these games we can change history. They propose an alternative history, and maybe this power to intervene in the way of the history is very attractive. We can imagine that I don't know Troya won the war against the Greece, and what happened. So it's a big topic, it's a very interesting topic.
And actually, I just very short remarks that historians not own history, yeah. So we couldn't demand from public that they hear in us. So we need to do something that they want to hear. So of course it must be some kind of entertainment, but we still could be experts. And I just think that this war bring us to really understanding in what extent the memory wars could be. Yeah, so that is very depressing, of course. But I mean, and that's why I spoke about memory laws. I think we need to take it seriously. Yeah, so that's an historical consciousness that they provided by these memory laws, and of course, no memories, single memories could. Eliminated philosophy of history. Of course not, but still they prohibited some kind of judgment about certain historical events, that they became just sacred for some communities. And it is already long story, but we just need to overthink it, I think.
As for historians, I think the historians should not only research into history, but also to try to understand the processes in cultures of history, of memory cultures, of using history. That was the starting point for our research group. Not to cry about the society that are not hearing to the historians, but to understand what are the ways history is used to different, very, very different. There's not only politics, not only politics of history, but very different ways history is used for very different individual and collective purposes and goals. And we have to, and that's the field where historians are able to deliver a historical expertise on contemporary societal and cultural processes. So we have to research into that, and not only to react to the new processes. As for the new situation, I would not say that I could observe new general tendencies in memory and memory cultures. Of course. There are partial new tendencies and phenomena. If you look on Ukrainian his culture of history, on Polish culture of history, you have even new contexts or new categories or new ways of thinking of the history. An example is the very new topic of decolonizing Ukrainian history. How to decolonize history? But it's only a kind of transfer of logical and theoretical or logical categories used in other contexts that have been used for decades. emotions. It's very important. It's a very important point because that politicians and other actors are, besides of historians, are using history. It's not new. What was new in 19th history were the claims of historians to have the decisive voice in the historical discourse. So sometimes I think maybe we are coming back to historical normality, that not historians the historians are not so important in historical. It's sad for me, of course, but I'm not able to change this tendency. We can reflect on it, and we can analyze what are the consequences. We have to discuss what does it mean for the future. What emotions? There is still a very long discussion, or I would even say argument about historical reenactments. Not only reenactments on the battlefields, but general way. How are they able, the reenactments, to produce empathy with historical actors? And there's the ones answers yes, it's the best way to produce, to bring the people to the idea, or to the perspective, or to an idea how historical actors had perceived their situation, their problems, historical crises, and so on. And the other ones says no, that even reenactments on the emotional level prevent us from understanding history, because we project our modern or postmodern emotions into deep history, and that's our emotions of today have not to do with the emotions and perspectives and perceptions and what is in German called Lebenswelten of the people that lived several centuries ago.
Only one small remark of mine. You spoke about plays, and I will stress the role of film as a vehicle. Is joining some knowledge with much emotions, and I spoke about two films that are able to change the mood in the Polish-Ukrainian relations. I think about the film Unsere Mütter, unsere Väter. The Polish-German relations were really worsening after that film. Or a film, Russian film in the 90s about, I forget the title, a historical film about the Great Smuta and the liberation of Kremlin from the Polish Polish hand. Very interesting film, critical scenes in Poland and so on. So only small.
I'd like to add some more. You're speaking on films. You have mentioned these computer games by the Czech, developed by the Czech company, and I was addressed by reviewers because the games have reviews too, and a group of reviewers addressed me some 5 years ago because there was a new game developed by this Czech company. And there was a problem. The story of this game took place in medieval Bohemia, 13th century maybe. And the problem was that that all the knights in the game were white. There were no one black Bohemian knight of the 13th century. And that is what I meant by retrotopic praxis, because because not the decisive point is not how it was in the reality, but the decisive point is how we want to have it. We want to have the history, and maybe in this point the romantic wave of thinking on history is coming back. Not decisive is the true, nicht die Wahrheit der Fakten, not the true of facts, but the true of ideas. But romantics meant by ideas, romantics meant the spirit of the historical period. So Geschichtsgeist, Geist der Geschichte. And now our starting point is the spirit of our period. That would be maybe the difference between retrotopical praxis and the romantical usage of history. Romantic.
On n'a plus le temps. Just a little remark about films. When in Russia in 2010, the film of Vaida, Katyn, was shown in the TV, many Russian people learned for the first time about this event, although Russia recognized officially the crime, the Soviet crime. And now Katyn is negated again, or worse, justified with this argument that Polish attitude against the Russian prisoners in the Russian-Polish war justify the Katyn crime. So the action of the film was very strong, but not very long.
Yeah. Thank you so very much. We're running out of time, but if there's 1-2 questions from the public, I think we totally can.
Hi, I'm Bradley Reynolds from the University of Helsinki. This is a question for Milos Reznik. So thank you all for the presentations. On this idea that you were talking about of if we can't form the future, then we form the past. So this is probably a much wider question, but it's the idea that if we think about imagined communities or the invention of tradition, can we say that the past has previously been used to kind of imagine a certain type of future? And then kind of this would be interesting to hear more about your postmodern perspective in if kind of the nation state is no longer this ideal modernity, then kind of do we need to find something else, and what might that be? It's a very large question, but maybe I can follow up later. Thank you.
And maybe another question, and then yeah.
Thank you very much for the fascinating talks. I have a lot of questions actually, but but only a few of them. First of all, the question to Mr. Riedel. This incredible solidarity which we have now from the common people in Poland regarding Ukraine is considered as a chance for both nations to overcome this historical split, and now we have the discussion what to do with the history. And my question is what kind of politics of history would be effective here? It can be so oblivion, yeah, some forgetting, some shifting from all these questions. There was a tendency in Ukraine recently that we have too much history. Yeah? We should leave history to historians and live with the future, yeah? Or we have to do something like policy objectivity. Every part can have right for their own heroes, and so this is the question: what to do with such kind of history? history, it's a problematic history. The second question is to Mrs. Dubina. My question, that is more or less clear what is the logic of Russian government, of Putin, that are people who were formed by 90s, and in the 90s that revelation demoralized Soviet elite and Soviet society, and it is considered like some danger for the state, for the Russian state, and for Putin's regime, and it was especially after this protest in Moscow, so emphasized in Russia after 2012. But my question is what is happening so on the ground from below? Many people say that no one in the West, in Europe, know much about Ukraine. What Ukraine is, but I would say that no one have no idea what Russia is in Europe and in the West. And my question is there something like reaction from below on this laws from the side of history teachers, some solidarity action among historians? So, but these examples with tanks on Berlin, it wasn't initiated only by the government in Russia. Yeah? It was supported from the side of Russian society. How was this reaction? And if I may, the question to Mr. Reznik. This is important discussion. It was initiated by Pierre Nora, this relation between the vision of future and the past. But I'm wondering. Okay, we have every time we have the worse and worse the vision of the future. But the question is why the vision of the past is getting worse. Of the past at the same time, especially the vision of American past, for example, it is getting so worse and worse. That is, and that's it. Thank you.
Well, we collecting questions, or if there's maybe one last question.
Okay. Frank Relka, Polish Study Institute for Interdisciplinary Polish Studies in Viadrina, Frankfurt Oder. I just was wondering why we historians are so reluctant to look at the beauty of history, as Miloš Reznik said. We are reluctant to use anthropological aspects and concepts in our historical writing. And I read all of your papers as a kind of a statement for an alternative history to look at solidarity, to look at charity, to look at mutual help, especially Jan Riedel mentioned. Why are we so reluctant to stress these factors? Polish-German history over the last 50 years is determined by this discourse of reconciliation until today. Is determined by this discourse of reconciliation until today, and it might be the same way with Ukrainian-Polish relations in the future. So, what the hell is the problem to write about the beauty of history, as Miloš Reznik said? Why are we still looking for the facts for what the big powers are doing in the government? I don't know. Maybe one of you can answer me the question.
So the first question was for me. I think, in contrary to Miloš Reznik, that the historians have a great role to play in historical policy, memory policy. It is. So to say, only the historian could provide the input in the right direction. The work of historian is is based on sources and the actual state of knowledge about history is the best possible, so to say, vision of history. And if we can transmit this actual state of knowledge in the language of popular media, we can see that the history has, in the most cases, no this explosive form or explosive Wirkung, action. And it is Polish-German experience, I would say, despite the problems of reparations from the last time, in the field of great field of Polish-German conflicts, historical conflicts, there are now only few discutable fields. Many things are cleared, and it is fully artificial to repeat the old, now cleared conflicts. It is the work of historian, the work of Polish-German Historical Commission for 40, 50 years, and so on. So on. It takes time, but it is probably the only successful way. The question about Rose. Yeah.
Okay, I have only one question, yeah, about what's happening from below. You mean if it's some protest against this memory laws in Russia? I understand you right? Rightly? Correctly? Yeah, of course it was. Yeah, so as a 2009 when this criminal law against Nazis, yeah, so this then was applied. It was a great protest, and that's why there's historians also wrote the letters, and actually in cabinet of ministers also people said against it. So they just put it on hold, and 2014. Just very, very quickly make a new law. So it happens in Russia. We have a lot of protests. Now you're not supposed to protest anymore on the streets, yeah, because it's forbidden to make any protest in the streets. Also, if you're staying alone and protest, you can write letters still. It's possible, yeah. But I mean, we just probably missed the time, or just was the forces was not so equal. That's why it's or protest again Единый учебник. That's the only history book, for example. Never come to schools. That's the only history book. Yeah, it was a great protest, huge protest among historians, and not only historians and human rights people. Yes. Yeah, it's teachers of history. Yes, of course. Now people now protesting, so they could. Yeah, so it's a silent protest. Yeah, they put oral book in 1984. Yeah, 84. Yeah, in a vitrine. That's to show that we're against this. Yeah, because it's no open protest possible. In Russian law system now. So that's a protest that they could, or just live in Russia because of this war. It's also one protest.
Maybe I can add that the main association which carried these protests, Memorial Association, was dissolved. So they cannot protest now. They can, but from abroad.
The classical modern model was the idea that there is a logical connection between past, present, and future. So the history in the historicism, the particular was historicism was a function of futurism. You need the history to tell the story that should be continued on in a certain form or in a certain direction. And this logical connection collapsed a little bit in last decade. So at this point, past, future, past, present, and we are looking partly back to past, because what was the reason for this collapse of future visions? Maybe I would think it's less and less possible to predict. The future is less and less predictable, or seems to be less and less predictable. We are surprised every 3 years by developments that we have not expected. The war in Ukraine, the pandemics, the migration crisis, and so on. So we on again this background. Please notice that. For some 30 years, we have a kind of endism in European culture. We are still speaking of not only Fukuyama after 1989, but at the latest with 2000, with 9/11. Every 2 or 3 years, we used to say the world will never more be as we now know it. That's the end of our world. That was the case after pandemics. That was the case during the migration crisis. That is the case now, and every couple of years we repeat this, and are convinced that we are living at a turning point of history where something ends and we don't know what starts. That it's the one thing. Of course, you have different. The history is not only beautiful, but you still, in postmodern times, you still can have you can enjoy the history. You can have a lot of fun with history through reenactments, through films, through literature, combination of fantasy and historical fiction, and so on. Games, I mentioned. Games, tourism. You making fun with history through tourism. It's very important tendency in the last 3 decades. The role of heritage, history, authenticity in the tourism. I agree completely with you. I'm very normative. I'm a very normative historian, and I would say historians are very important and should decide or have a very important voice. But the problem is, and that is what we probably can't change, a large part of society, of public, of politicians don't accept this role. They don't acknowledge the role of historians. Partly they can use it. I don't say that is without any importance in the debate, but the society today. For the society today, the academic historiography is only one of the many sources of what is called historical, or what they call historical knowledge, and that's, I think that's good. But we should take into account we are very limited in our possibilities to change this tendency, but even that is a historical tendency of our days. Maybe I forgot now. I've forgotten some questions, but the time's out.
The time's running total out. So I guess this would be perhaps a first, but not very optimistic conclusion of this panel and this conference. Thank you so very much to all the speakers, and we've got like 15 minutes. Is it 10 minutes left for a coffee break?
30 minutes in program, but not.
Oh yeah.
I'd say 15 minutes.
15 minutes break. Thank you so very much.